All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. We took about a week-long break from the Myth of Sisyphus, but we are back on track. Earlier, we did the past 4 or 5 episodes. I went over an absurd reasoning, with the 5th episode kind of being an overview with Jamal Lixet, which I've had on the podcast twice before. And what we went over was essentially a philosophical suicide. The fundamental philosophical question: is life worth living? And more or less just, I guess, why the absurd liberates us. It liberates us from being enslaved by an ideal, and it sets us free to live life for the sake of living, rather than living it for something beyond living or outside anything other than to live. Right? The absurd man does not attach themselves to anything eternal. So with that being said, part 2 gives an overview of the absurd man, what Camus believes to be the absurd man, with his main example being that of Don Juan, which I'll get into here in a little bit. But this chapter is broken out into 3 sections. We have Don Juanism, drama, and conquest. I'll be doing each one in a separate episode, starting with Don Juanism on this one. So with that said, I want to get right into it. However, I just want to give out a few announcements. So after a little bit of controversy, not much, just like basically someone just said something to me, I decided to change the title of my novel, The Man Who Killed God, back to its original title, On Death and God. I am doing this because I don't want to give off the false impression that my book is about killing God, because it isn't. Nor do I want people to think that it's anti-religious or it goes against God or it's some kind of satanic book, right? Because it's really not. This book is about my conception of what I believe God to be, written in basically a fictional allegory of how I view and believe of the world, right? It's my conceptualization of my reality through the lens of fiction. Um, and that fiction is a fantasy. It's a fantasy about a man who is killed and who must travel through the deepest layers of hell to slay the gods and save everything he ever loved. And the god that he's killing is the false god that has been controlling him, which is more or less his ego. John's ego, the thing that's up here. It has all these ideals and all these ideas and all these I want to be this, I want to do that, I need this. It has all these desires and these wants and these needs. Um, it's attached itself, just like the person who isn't absurd. It's attached itself to something eternal. It lives for the eternal, and he worships this eternal God rather than following his heart, saving what he loves, following what he loves. And that's what the book is about. It's about overcoming death through a new conceptualization of God by killing the false God that once controlled him. So, anyways, I'm changing the title back to its original title, which is the title that you see on the audiobook edition, which is posted here on the podcast, because I want to decrease any misconstrued preconceptions regarding what this is about, and I also want to encourage, say, religious people to read it. I know a few people who said they aren't going to read it because it's about killing God, and it's just not about that. And it's a deeply religious and spiritual book, and so I would never want someone who is religious to be discouraged from reading it. So I'm changing it to On Death and God. And with that said, the final 2 copies of the 25 that I printed out are available at the Well Red Moose here in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. However, I also have a personal copy of The Man Who Killed God, and I will mail it to the first person that emails me. If you email me and you want it, I will email it right back to you, or mail it right back to you. Just give me a valid mailing address and I will send it right over to you for free. Just be the first person to email me. Just and to email me, just go to into-the-absurd.com and scroll down to that contact link. So anyhow, on another note, On Death and God is now available in print and ebook on my website and in the link in the description. I'm now selling the print for $10 and the ebook for $3. So go check that out if you want to support the podcast. If you don't want to read, if you have no desire to read, and you still want to support the podcast, just scroll down a little bit further in the description, and there's some merch links available for you. So anyways, if you want that book, just scroll down the link in the description. So finally, I'm considering doing a book club. So if anyone's interested, just again, send me an email through that contact link, and you don't have to be a listener of the podcast to join. So feel free to bring a friend along, right? Just kind of give me a heads up, just shoot me some emails, and we can probably get that going here in January, give people enough time to get interested in it. So some books that I'm interested in reading include, well, the Bible. I'm going to be reading the Bible here soon. And also, I'm reading the Bible specifically to prepare for the Divine Comedy, which I'll be doing an analysis on with Mr. Royce Johnson, who was my English teacher in high school, and he's been on the podcast twice now. So excited for that. I'll also be reading a few other books, including I think it's called Dark Matter. My girlfriend just ordered it for me. So that'd probably be a great book club book to read. And I don't know, who knows? Let's try that one out. But if you are interested in joining the book club, just send me a message and also give like 3 book ideas just so we can kind of put them all out there. So sweet. Let's dive right into this. Don Juanism. I am going to share my screen for you YouTubers out there. So let's do that. Let's get the view so it's nice and focus mode. Let's do it. And I'm also going to move. I honestly have no idea if you can even see the camera. I wish I could like switch it so hide video panel. I wonder if there's like a sharing options. No, there isn't. That's okay. Band sharing options. Okay, that's fine. I just figure if I'm a little bit bigger on the screen, if you are actually watching this, it might be a little bit more entertaining. But that's okay. This is definitely a listener-friendly podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, so feel free to listen on there. All right, Don Juanism. Now, before we dive too deep into the content of this chapter, I wanted to give some context on the title character, that being Don Juan. Don Juan is a Spanish archetypal figure. He's a character who originates from the book The Seducer of Seville, which was written in 1630. The legend of Don Juan is essentially about a man, namely Don Juan, who wears disguises and uses trickery to seduce women. More or less, Don Juan is what us modern folk refer to as a player. He basically goes around and sleeps with women, right? Except that the difference between Don Juan and a player is that Don Juan actually falls in love with these women and then moves on and falls in love again. So we'll see a closer comparison to Don Juan and the actor, and see, Camus using two characters here in Don Juanism and drama, the first and second section. Don Juan as basically the personification of a real life actor. He's not acting in a play, but he's acting in real life. And then drama, we have the actor, the person who goes on stage and pretends to be a different person. Right? So we'll see more of that as we go on when we go into the drama section. Now, the specific story that Camus refers to in section 1 goes like this. Don Juan seduced a woman from a noble family, and because of this, her father tried to avenge her. And Don Juan, consequently, killed him. Basically out of self-defense, I think. And soon after, Don Juan is sent to be executed. And since he refuses to repent for his sins, he is eternally damned. Camus claims that Don Juan is a great example of an absurd man, which is precisely why he named the section after him. Don Juan does not repent for his sins because he is innocent. Not in the sense that he didn't do what he was accused of, but rather kind of more so what we've been talking about, right? Because it's impossible to know whether sin is real or not. It's impossible to know anything for certain. Now, Camus begins this section with a short introduction to what he believes to be the absurd man. Quote, "My field," said Goethe, "is time. That is indeed the absurd speech. What, in fact, is the absurd man? He who, without negating it, does nothing for the eternal. Not that nostalgia is foreign to him, but he prefers his courage and his reasoning. The first teaches him to live without appeal and to get along with what he has. The second informs him of his limits. Assured of his temporarily limited freedom, of his revolt devoid of future, and of his mortal consciousness, he lives out his adventure within the span of his lifetime. That is his field. That is his action, which he shields from any judgment but his own. A greater life cannot mean for him another life." End quote. So there's a lot to unpack here. First off, doing nothing for the eternal means that one does not do anything for, one, the future, and two, a God, religion, or ideal or idea, right? The future is the eternal because it exists as something that has both not yet happened and is likewise not guaranteed to happen, right? The future is not guaranteed to happen because you will die, right? And also the future doesn't really exist, right? Because you're always in the now. That is, the future exists somewhere within eternity, somewhere within the abstract, which likewise not guaranteed nor has transpired yet, right? And eternity actually can never transpire since there's always an infinite amount of time left, right? You can never live through eternity. Now, the ideal is eternal because it exists as a defined concept. And the absurd man does not live for concepts because a permanent concept cannot be lived for by an ever-changing man, right? Now, courage teaches one to live without appeal, meaning living without a reason to live, and to accept what they have now. They live without having to justify their existence, right? That is, they live for the sake of living, and that gives them their innocence, right? Likewise, not having a reason to live allows them to live for now precisely because life only ever happens now. And this takes bravery because it requires one to be honest about who they are and to accept any consequences related to not living for the future or for an ideal. They likewise need to rebel against any ideologies that people attempt to shove down their throat, right? Now, reason. Here we get to reason, right? It informs the absurd man of his limits. He can think through, oh, well, I can't know that. I know I can't know that, right? I know I can't know that. I know I can't do that. I know I'm not going to live forever, right? You have limits. He is able to discern what he knows from what he does not know, which more or less is everything, right? The absurd man is aware of his finite existence and the limited time they have to live. And because of this, the absurd man's field is time. That is, they live only for that which occurs within their lifetime. Okay? And when I say absurd man, I really mean an absurd person. It's just in the context of the essay, he was saying absurd man and a lot of like he pronouns. So that's just it's just easier to say it like that, just because I'm already in that mindset. But obviously, a woman can be absurd too. Anyone can be absurd, right? Now, when the chaplain from the stranger asked Marceau if he ever wished for another life, and again, I'm recalling the stranger, right? That Camus' The Stranger. Rousseau replies angrily that he only wishes for a life in which he, quote, can remember this one, and he shouts that right to the chaplain. It's a very powerful moment in the book. Another life is not one that the absurd man wishes to live precisely because there is no guarantee of another life. All the absurd man has for certain is this life. Hoping for another one won't get them anywhere. Again, a greater life cannot mean for him another life because there is no other life. The only life is the one that Marceau lives now. This is a particularly useful and important philosophy as it pertains to just daily life in general, right? Um, Now, I'm the kind of person that's very guilty of always thinking that the grass is greener on the other side. I'm always thinking of a way to get out of a situation or fantasizing about the future or thinking about an alternate reality where I'm doing something else, things like that. I'm always dreaming of another life, right? And in a sense, what I'm doing here is plotting an escape from my current reality. And the need for an escape implies the belief that one lives in a prison. And to Camus, the absurd man does not set us free from this prison, but rather dispels the illusion that we live in one in the first place. Life is not a prison. It's just life, right? It's just life. You're not stuck here, right? And you will escape eventually, right? It's but it's not a death sentence, and it's not something that you should want to escape from. It's the life we were given, and there simply isn't another one out there for us, right? Or at least we can never know for certain if there is another life out there for us. And even if there is another life out there for us, when you get there, you'll still be here right now, right? You'll be here now, whether you're reincarnated as I don't know, Galileo or Leonardo da Vinci or some poor guy on the street. You'll still be living in the now as a person who's experiencing things right now. So even if you have that other life, it's not any better than this one because you're still going to be sitting here waiting for the future, right? So why not just enjoy now? And I know I've been saying that a lot, but that's the thing that I'm trying to drill into your heads. Uh, with the myth of Sisyphus is that that's what this is about. It's about being here, present, now in this reality and not wishing for another life. Being okay pushing that rock up the hill, right? With that said, it sounds cliche, but what Camus is saying here is make the most of it, right? Seize the day, carpe diem, love your fate, amor fati. Camus goes on to say that while, according to Ivan Karamazov, I think from the Karamazov brothers, read by Dostoevsky, everything is permitted. But this does not mean that nothing is forbidden. Quote, the absurd does not liberate, it binds, meaning that it binds one to his present reality. And with that said, that gives them a responsibility to each and every one of their actions. And actions have consequences, right? Everything you do has a reaction, some kind of consequence to it. Regardless, since the absurd man is innocent, right? He is never guilty. Guilt implies judgment, and judgment comes from a place beyond the now. It is an eternal, right? It's a concept. Or at least all judgment is based off a concept. Quote, the absurd merely confers an equivalence on the consequences of those actions. It does not recommend crime, for this would be childish, but it restores to remorse its futility. Likewise, if all experiences are indifferent, that of duty is as legitimate as any other. One can be virtuous through a whim. End quote. The absurd man acts with the awareness of the consequences he will face for such actions within his lifetime, right? Everything they do, they're aware of what is at stake. And by this, they can be virtuous. That is where they derive their virtue. And by this, they can be respectful. The absurd man follows the laws not for the principle of the law, but rather for the consequences of not following them and for the positive impact it has on his relationships with other people. This brings to mind something my therapist told me kind of a while back. I stopped going to therapy, which I probably should keep going because I'm kind of crazy. But essentially, he was telling me that I need to, when I'm looking back at the past, instead of taking fault for things, I need to take responsibility for them. Not necessarily the things that I did, but I need to take responsibility in kind of paying back the things that I did, changing my behavior be better, right? I did that, and in the future, I'm going to do this, right? It was my responsibility. I am responsible for what happened, and I will make amends for it. Not, it was my fault, and I feel bad, right? Responsibility gives me the freedom to change my current reality and act on those things in which I lack. Whereas fault involves things that we have already done wrongly, but it does not imply any method of making up for these things. Now, the absurd man takes responsibility for their actions, not fault. They accept the weight of fixing what is broken without accepting the guilt, fault, or blame of having broken it. The absurd man, again, is innocent, and likewise are they free. Quote, a subclerk in the post office is the equal of a conqueror if consciousness is common to them. All experiences are indifferent in this regard. There are some that do either a service or a disservice to man. They do him a service if he is conscious. Otherwise, that has no importance. A man's failures imply judgment, not of circumstances, but of himself. That is, it is not who you are or the circumstances you're involved in that define how good you are or how good your life is. It's how you conceptualize it and how much you're aware of it. And to Camus' theory, the more aware you are of your life, the more enjoyable it is, right? And for the purpose of this chapter, Camus seeks to only speak of those people in which thoughts are devoid of their future, their mind is focused on the now, and they take sole responsibility for the life in which they live. Enter Don Juan. If it were sufficient to love, things would be too easy. And there's a quote, sorry. The more one loves, the stronger the absurd grows. It is not through lack of love that Don Juan goes from woman to woman. It is ridiculous to represent him as a mystic in quest of total love. But it is indeed because he loves them with the same passion and each time with his whole self that he must repeat his gift and his profound quest. Whence each woman hopes to give him what no one has ever given him. Each time they're utterly wrong and merely manage to make him feel the need of that repetition. At last, exclaims one of them, I have given you love. Can we be surprised that Don Juan laughs at this? At last! No, he says, but once more. Why should it be essential to love rarely in order to love much? End quote. This is a very powerful quote because Don Juan falls in love with every woman with that same passion, right? Because Don Juan is kind of like a dog, right? Each and every time his owner comes home, he lights up with that very same enthusiastic euphoria. He's never not happy to see his owner, right? He's never not happy to see that next woman. He's never not happy to see the next day. And Don Juan loves women because love to Don Juan is an infinite resource. It is not limited to one person or one relationship. It is something that he gives in equal amount and strength to every single woman he meets. Not at last, but once more. And he loves with the same strength, precisely because he does not love for the purpose of something eternal, right? That is, he does not love because he is trying to find love, i.e., one person to love. He's not trying to find a soulmate. He's not trying to find that eternal thing that he can latch his soul onto. And this soulmate is something that Western culture has kind of made us believe in. And to be honest, I think it's part of the reason why a lot of relationships fail because people are looking for a soulmate, but the reality is no one's perfect and that there isn't someone out there for you that's like attached to your soul. It might feel like it for like 3 years or 2 weeks or however long, but eventually you'll find out that, oh, yeah, no, our souls are not eternally bound because we're all totally ever-changing people, right? And basing the reason for your monogamous relationship on love or on a soulmate doesn't really work. And that's why marriages historically have never been founded on love. It's kind of the past like 200 years where we started thinking that that's what the basis of marriage is about. I won't go into that anymore, but Don Juan loves for the sake of loving, right? He loves the feeling of love and the joy that it brings him when he meets a new woman. But also like a dog, Don Juan gets bored easily, right? He gets distracted. One moment he's absolutely obsessed with a woman, and the next moment he's out the door, right? Don Juan acts not on what he believes, but what he feels, which is exactly how the stranger acted, right? From well, the stranger, right? He lives totally and absolutely for the now and is present in his reality. Quote, every healthy creature tends to multiply himself. So it is with Don Juan. But furthermore, melancholy people have two reasons for being so. They don't know or they hope. Don Juan knows and does not hope. He reminds one of those artists who know their limits, never go beyond them, and in that precarious interval in which they take their spiritual stand, enjoy all the wonderful ease of masters. Then further down the page, we have, quote, for nothing is vanity to him except the hope of another life. He proves this because he gambles that other life against heaven itself, end quote, right? When he refuses to repent. And Don Juan multiplies himself by multiplying that state in which he feels the most himself, namely as a seducer. He multiplies this aspect of himself by continuously falling in love with woman after woman. And, quote, if he leaves a woman, it is not absolutely because he has ceased to desire her. A beautiful woman is always desirable, but he desires another. And no, this is not the same thing, end quote. Now, Camus says Don Juan is not melancholy because he knows his limits and he does not hope for another life, right? And it's interesting that he's bringing this up here because you can kind of then see how we lead up to his grand conclusion in Myth of Sisyphus, that one must imagine Sisyphus happy, right? He's saying that Don Juan is not melancholy, meaning that he's happy, right? So, right, he knows his limits and he does not hope for another life. That is, he knows what he cannot know, and he knows what will make him unhappy. Likewise, he knows that the only life he has is this one. So he must make the most out of every moment, every experience, and every woman. To return to my explanation of the Don Juan tale, remember that Don Juan had refused to repent. He did so because the reason for repenting was so Don Juan could have access to another life, namely heaven. However, it is pivotal to Don Juan's life philosophy that he does not wish for another life. He cannot wish for that other life, right? He can't, because wishing for another life would consequently make this one, the one that he's currently living, insignificant or lesser than the new imagined life. Additionally, this new imagined life is known by Don Juan to not be guaranteed. And why would a man who lives for the now, who's totally present in his reality, and who knows their limits, ever seek a life that he doesn't even know exists? He wouldn't. Because Don Juan doesn't live for promises, nor does he live for ideas or beliefs. Don Juan lives for love, life, and passion, right? And this is precisely why Camus chose Don Juan to be his absurd man, or at least his example of an absurd man. Quote, Don Juan can be properly understood only by constant reference to what he commonly symbolizes: the ordinary seducer and the sexual athlete. He is an ordinary seducer, except for the difference that he is conscious, and that is why he is absurd. A seducer who has become lucid will not change for all that. Seducing is his condition in life. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever watched, say, How I Met Your Mother, or Two and a Half Men, or Family Guy. But, we have characters like Barney Stinson or Charlie Harper or Quagmire who are seducers. However, they aren't conscious of what they're doing. Like, sure, they know that they're seducers, but they're not conscious of how meaningless it is, right? They just feel horrible about themselves, right? And they're not accepting it. The love that they have with women is meaningless and empty. On the other hand, Don Juan is aware that he is a seducer. He's aware that that's his condition in life. Likewise, he is aware that he is unable to find happiness with any one woman. Instead, he can only find happiness from being with every woman. And he's aware of that. He's aware that the love he has with a woman will quickly fade away. He's aware that he will simply move on to the next woman, right? That awareness is what makes it absurd. It is absurd that he even involves himself with any woman if the relationship will simply fade away, right? It's just going to crumble. But Don Juan's awareness of this absurdity allows him to simply embrace it. He embraces the absurdity that the relationship will end by cherishing it all the more, by loving as deeply and profoundly as he possibly can. Seducing is his condition in life. And because of that, he damn well better enjoy it, right? He damn well better fall in love with every single woman he meets. He better fall hard. Quote, Don Juan realizes in action is an ethic of quantity, whereas the saint, on the contrary, tends toward quality. Not to believe in the profound meaning of things belongs to the absurd man. End quote. This is then followed with the absurd man is he who is not apart from time. Don Juan does not think of collecting women. He exhausts their number and with them his chances of life. Collecting amounts to being capable of living off one's past, but he rejects regret, the other form of hope. He's incapable of looking at portraits. End quote. So there's two parts to this. For one, Don Juan seeks quantity precisely because every experience is just as good as the last, so long as you are present. Quality implies that not all experiences have equal quality, right? It means that some are better than others, meaning each experience could be vastly different than another one, right? Like you could it means that you have a value judgment over your experiences. And this means that the future or another life could be better than the life that you're living now, right? This life. Don Juan cannot live by that philosophy. He cannot live by quality because only this life, right now, matters to him. And to give one experience value over another would be to grant it a profound meaning, right? And this is contrary to his life philosophy, right? He doesn't live by the eternal. The absurd man lives only for now. He does not live for an idea, a profound meaning, because he believes that the world is meaningless. There is no meaning because he cannot know a meaning for certain. Now, Don Juan does not collect women. He exhausts them. If it's not obvious, women, at least I think, is an analogy for life experiences here. Because Don Juan cannot live off of memories. The past is gone forever, and longing for the past is no different than hope. And Don Juan doesn't hope. He lives in the now. And because he lives in the now, because his field is time, just like Goth, he lives at one with time. And time does not go backwards, it does not pause, nor does it skip to the future. Time moves at a constant rate. And it's ever changing, right? That things are ever changing within the confines of time. And every woman is just as good as the last, and he does not dwell on old flames nor long for new ones. He merely lives out his relationship, exhausts it with woman until its natural end, consequently moving on to the next woman. Likewise, the absurd man does not collect memories nor hope for the future. He lives out experiences to the fullest, then moves on. Quote, there are those who are made for living and those who are made for loving. At least Don Juan would be inclined to say so. But he would do so in very few words, such as he is capable of choosing. For the love we are speaking of here is clothed in illusions of the eternal. End quote. Now, this again brings to mind existential lightness and weight. For Don Juan, he is made for living, which seems counterintuitive, right? That is, he lives for life and all it has to offer. He is existentially light. He's not bound by any ideal, belief, hope, or dream, not even love. To the contrary, when one is existentially heavy, they have eternalized an ideal, or a concept, or a feeling, or dream, or even a goal. And they've consequently decided to live for that, right? You have the goal of being a doctor, so then you live to be a doctor. You have the goal of falling in love and having a family, so you live for that, right? In romance, one eternalizes the feeling of love and declares, quote, I will love you forever, right? I'll love you forever. I love you. I love you so much. I love you forever, always. That is, the feeling of love is translated into an eternal concept. When you say that you love someone forever, you're making a promise to them. But isn't love a feeling? You won't always feel love all the time, right? And in that context, it becomes an idea that one lives by. And Don Juan never loves as a concept because his love is only a feeling. But the word only downplays it here, right? Because Don Juan's love is real love. It is a passionate feeling that he leaves within him, right? It leaves himself because he gets so he gets so passionate and so attached to the other person that he like there's nothing that he can do to stop it. He can't feel anything other than love. Don Juan does not declare eternal love upon anyone because he knows such a thing is neither guaranteed nor possible. What he knows for certain, however, is that he currently feels love. He's not weighed down by an idealized concept and is free to feel what he feels, know what he knows, and say what he believes to be true. Quote, he knows just as well that those who turn away from all personal life through great love enrich themselves, perhaps, but certainly impoverish those their love has chosen. A mother or a passionate wife necessarily has a closed heart, for it is turned away from the world. A single emotion, a single creature, a single face, but all is devoured. Quite a different love disturbs Don Juan, and this one is liberating. It brings with it all the faces in the world, and its tremor comes from the fact that it knows itself to be mortal. Don Juan has chosen to be nothing. End quote. Now, this is a concept that Chris Ryan, the author of Sex at Dawn, often mentions on his Tangentially Speaking podcast. And I mention a lot on this podcast. Our economy is based on the concept that resources are scarce, right? This is Thomas Hobbes thinking here. With that said, this concept bleeds into our personal lives through monogamy, in the claim that love, just like resources, is scarce. Love is a resource. It's a commodity, in a sense. If a mother loves her husband and children, she cannot love anyone else. Her love is limited to her husband and children. But what Camus is saying here is that Don Juan can love anyone and everyone. Don Juan's love is infinite. It is not scarce. So for the existentially light, love is infinite. And for the heavy, love is scarce. In hunter-gatherer tribes, everyone loves everyone else in their tribe, right? Because it's a community. It's a communal group. Love is an infinite resource that is given to everyone. Likewise, hunter-gatherers do not live for the future, right? They live out their emotions and experiences and love only in the present moment. They live for the now, for today, for tomorrow. But modern society, on the other hand, lives for the concept of progress, right? That is, we live for the future. The future being an ideal implies that we live for an ideal, right? Again, the existentially light live to live, while the existentially heavy live for something outside of living. And I think this is one of the reasons why a lot of relationships fail and a lot of people are so uncommitted to life. They're so like wishy-washy, they're so flaky nowadays because our society has become so focused on progress, so focused on the future that we can't focus on what's right in front of us. We're always thinking of the next thing, right? Like, well, what's the next thrill? What's the next dopamine rush? Like, what can I do next, right? There is a moment pause, where we just pause and think for a moment, right? But Don Juan, not wanting to live for an ideal or be someone he is not, has chosen to be nothing. He is no one. He's merely a man living out his life the way that he chooses to, moment by moment. Later on, Camus explains that since Don Juan cannot unify love, since he cannot turn love into an eternal concept, he multiplies it. That is, he creates more experiences of love. So since the absurd man cannot be weighed down and cannot unify, he must create. Quote, there is no noble love, but that which recognizes itself to be short-lived and exceptional. End quote. Just like what my uncle told me. I was like 5, and I found this gardener snake over by the river. So, and we were camping. So I grabbed it and I put it in this little cage. And then before I left, I was like, oh, I want to take Bob home. I named the snake Bob. And then my and then my uncle told me, no, you have to let it go. I'm like, but I really want to take it home. I love the snake. And then, of course, he said that classic cliche line, if you love it, let it go, right? It needs to be free. Love is a feeling. It's not a stamp of ownership. It's not something to be eternalized. The noble man can walk away when it's time to walk away. He can set the things that he loves free. Okay. So we move down this page and again see the contrast between responsibility and fault. Quote, no one wants to laugh at that tormented, pitiful Don Juan. He is pitied. Heaven itself will redeem him. But that's not it. In the universe of which Don Juan has a glimpse, ridicule too is included. He would consider it normal to be chastised. That is the rule of the game, and indeed, it is typical of his nobility to have accepted all the rules of the game. Yet he knows he is right, and that there can be no question of punishment. A fate is not a punishment. End quote. Don Juan knows the consequences of his actions and takes responsibility for them. He chose his fate, and fate, Don Juan, cannot be a punishment. Fate as a punishment would make his life something that he regrets. But Don Juan does not regret. He loves his life, and consequently, he loves his fate. Again, amor fati. Going back to the stranger, the final sentence now makes sense. For everything to be consummated, this quote, for everything to be consummated, for me to feel less alone, I'd only to wish that there be a large crowd of spectators the day of my execution to greet me with cries of hate. End quote. The stranger decided to play the game knowing the rules of the game, right? He wanted there to be cries of hate because he knew that was the consequences of an action he chose to do. Again, amor fati. Love your fate. That is his quote, that is his crime. And how easy it is to understand why the men of God call down punishment on his head. He achieves a knowledge without illusions, which negates everything they profess, loving and possessing, conquering and consuming. That is his way of knowing. And in parentheses, he writes, there is significance in that favorite scriptural word that calls the carnal act knowing. He is their worst enemy to the extent that he is ignorant of them. End quote. Don Juan is ignorant of illusions because he knows what he cannot know, or at least he thinks he does, and he accepts what he cannot know. That said, he goes through life without being distracted by things that are beyond his control or ability to understand. Ignorance is bliss, right? And Don Juan knows that he, along with everyone else, is ignorant. In that sense, it is almost as if, in say, a kind of a biblical example, if Don Juan chooses not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? He chooses not to eat from it. He stays in the garden with the knowledge that what comes beyond the fruit is only an illusion, right? When you take that red pill, when Neo takes the red pill in the Matrix, what he sees is just an illusion, right? Because what's the difference between the Matrix and the real world? What's the difference, right? In the subjective perspective, there isn't really any difference. That other world is just another illusion. How do you know that you're not stepping into a second Matrix, right? So he stays in the garden, right? And I like to, just as a disclaimer, I like to use the example of the Garden of Eden as like knowledge and awakening because it's, everyone knows the story and it just makes sense. It's not because like I'm clearly not religious at all. I just like to use that example because it really gets a point across of knowledge and being between innocence and ignorance and being aware of things, right? Okay. So that there is no knowledge, right? And that is what Don Juan knows. Eating the fruit will just lead to another illusion. Quote, "It was the fact of living that assured his innocence. It was from death alone that he derived a guilt now become legendary." End quote. Because Don Juan chose to remain in the garden, he chose blissful ignorance. He chose life. Not only that, but he chose a life not bound by made-up knowledge or beliefs or illusions, because he chose to live. And because he chose to live, he was innocent. He did not have the knowledge of good nor evil because he never ate from that fruit. He knows that mortality is made up. Sorry, morality is made up. It is an illusion along with all knowledge. And because of that, because of his awareness of his ignorance, he is innocent. Quote, Don Juan negated forever, end quote. Why? Why did he not repent? Why didn't he want heaven? Because not even infinity is greater than a single moment in Don Juan's life. To Don Juan, life is art, and now is the only forever. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you back on section 2, everybody. Take it easy.